Good morning, everyone. Let's start our prayers. Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo, Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parbrahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Om Bhur Bhavaswaha, Tatsavitruvarenayam, Vargo Devasya Dhimahi, Dhiyo Yo Nah Prachodayat, Asto Ma Sadgamya, Tamso Ma Jyotirgamya, Mrityurma Amritam Gamya. Om Sahna Bhavatu, Sahna Bhunaktu, Saviryam Karvavahi, तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहि. Om Shanti 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 Om. Today is Thursday, so our Upanishad, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad turn. So let's open our books. We are going to finish this first section of the second chapter. We are learning about the sleep, dream, and deep sleep. We are all familiar with the experience in our waking state, because that is, most of us are familiar with quite a bit. Our mind is working, our senses are working. And when we reach the dreaming state, the Swapanavastha, mind alone functions. Because all the organs and their objects, they have merged themselves in the mind. And what happens in the deep sleep, the Sushupti, in the deep sleep, even the mind sleeps, intellect sleeps. And what is there to experience in deep sleep? Because duality has ceased to exist, even the subject of the waking and dreaming state appears to be non-existent in the deep sleep. It is the self experiencing the self. It is the experience in a very mystical sense, not in an ordinary way. Because there's no triad of the experiencer, experienced, and experience. So that's why no language can express that supreme state. So let's start where we left off. That last two verses are remaining in this section for us to go through. So in our little book, which we are trying to follow in this class, page number 126, verse number 19. अथ यदा सुषुप्तः भवति यदा कस्यचिन न वेदहिता नाम द्वासप्ततिः सहस्राणि नाड्यः हृदयात् पुरितम् अभिप्रतिष्ठन्ते ताभि प्रत्यवृतसप्ये पुरिततिः शेतेः स यथा कुमारा महाराजा वा महाब्राह्मणा वा आनन्दस्य अतिग्रीम गत्वा शयेत एवम् एव एषः एतत् शेतेः. Again, when the self becomes fast asleep, and this self is with a, if you notice, with a lowercase s. So it's not the Atma. Atma never sleeps. Okay? So it's like a self. Again, when the self becomes fast asleep, when it is not aware of anything, it returns to the body along the 72,000 nerves called Hita, which branch off from the heart to all parts of the body and stays in it, just as a baby or a great king or a worthy Brahman lives Having reached the very limit of bliss, so does the self remain. So again, remember, this heart is not a physical organ. It is philosophical heart he's talking about. So when this person goes to deep sleep from the state of dream, so movement from the Swapan to Sushupti, he is profoundly calm. That's what he's saying. Composed, serene, and knows neither the waking nor dream world. And neither the objective nor the subjective perception. Self becomes conscious of itself. There is no longer any gulf between the subject and the object. Because normal consciousness of the subject as I and the object as the world is superseded for the time being. How? By the unitary consciousness of the self. That's why it is said that he has crept through those 72,000 nerves named Hita, which proceed from the heart to every part of the body, has rested in the heart. These channels of heart are filled with the finest essence. In other Upanishads, it said, these nerve channels, they spread forth all over our body. It's like a very minute hair. These are not the physical channels. They are divided and subdivided thousandfold, and they consist of the very minute essence. So sense intelligence prompts the organs to work in various directions. We are familiar with the waking state. It objectifies with the aid of sense organs. And that's when we are familiar with those nerve channels to all parts of the microcosm as well as the macrocosm. So when the sense intelligence contracts and there's a unification with the consciousness, that is the state without the dreaming. And this is what this Rishi is telling us, that where these 72,000 nerves are brought together, like the spokes in the hub of a wheel, the person rests. All sense functions become unified in the heart during sleep. And from there, when the consciousness flows through these nerves in the waking state, it's just like they contract and then they expand. It's like the rays of the setting sun. It seems like it's unified in the orb, and it's going forth again when it rises. So it's like it goes back to it, seems like, and then it expands from there. So everything becomes one in the heart, this philosophical heart. In this condition, just as a passionate person in the rapture of that embrace does not have any consciousness of the outer world, or sometimes not even the inner world of thoughts. No particular consciousness of the outer universe or the inner mental world. Sometimes in that condition, the person does not hear, does not smell, does not see, does not taste, speak. And this is how this deep sleep is. He is overcome with sound sleep. Then here in this body arises that happiness. And that's why he mentioned over here in this verse, like a baby. Baby enjoys a degree of happiness in a mother's lap. Or another example he gave, an emperor whose country is in peace enjoys a similar degree of happiness. A learned and virtuous Brahman, that's another example he gave, due to his knowledge, also enjoys a degree of happiness. All these arise out of contentment and absence of desire. So the individual self remains in a state of bliss and deep sleep, being in its own natural state. And they have transcended the attributes of the waking and dreaming state. There is a fundamental change in the individual consciousness in deep sleep. It is the unconditioned state, similar but not exact to Nirvikalp Samadhi. So the wise in giving expression to the actual condition in deep sleep seem to differ due to the incapacity of language to express that state. Why? Because it is beyond all thoughts and words. And being unconditioned, there's no particular consciousness. But still, it is not an unconscious state. It might appear to an ignorant person that deep sleep is like unconscious, but we all know that we go through that deep sleep every night. Deep sleep is that where there's no experience of the duality. There is ignorance though. See, that is the big difference between Nirvikalp Samadhi and deep sleep. Why it's ignorance? Because one does not know that one is experiencing the non-dual state of bliss. In Nirvikalp Samadhi, you are aware of that. In deep sleep, even though we go through that every night or every time we sleep, but we don't know that. The experience of the presence of a duality in the waking and the dream states, and of the absence of duality in the deep sleep state, are more passing shadows over the infinite, indivisible sky of our own Atma. So this king Ajaat Shatru enumerated to Rishi Gargye the different phases of consciousness. Gross sense consciousness in the waking state, subtle mental consciousness in the dream state, self-consciousness in this dreamless sleep state, through which the Supreme Soul seems to be active and non-active, even when there is really no duality. Now, this king Ajaat Shatru explains in a metaphorical language the projection of the world from the supreme consciousness through which it appears as manifold. But really, it's non-dual, it's ultimate absolute. It only seems like it is the substratum for the manifold world which the individual experiences in the three state. And he gives another beautiful analogy over here in the next verse, which is the last verse of this section. Sa yatha urnabhihi tantunah uchret yatha agne kshudraha vyucharanti evam evasmat atmana sarve prana sarve loka sarve sarvani bhutani vyucharanti tasye upanishad satyasya satyam iti prana ve satyam esha tesham satyam. As a spider moves along the thread which it produces, because where is it coming from? From the spider. So as a spider moves along the thread, or as from a fire little sparks scatter, just so from this self issue all organs, all worlds, all gods, and all living beings. Its secret name is the truth of truth. The vital force is truth. And it is the truth of that. So spider may move about on its web, or small sparks come from the fire. He says the same way the all sense organs, all worlds, all gods, all beings come from Atma. And also move around that too. And the name of this is the truth of truth. Satyasya satyam iti. The prans are truth. Pranaha ve satyam. And then he says, Tesham esh satyam. This is their truth. The consciousness moves in every individual, in the sun, moon, and stars. In fact, in the entire cosmos. So he says, same way as the spider moves on its web made up of the thread which it has emitted from its own body. He did not take anything from outside. It came from his own body and moves around in the same thread. Just like the herbs arise on the earth, or the hair on the head, and the body grow from a living person, the entire phenomena arise from this self. The self seems to be manifesting and projecting himself through the person in the sun, moon, wind, or other examples given over here. And they are not different from one another. They may appear to be different because of the names, forms, and actions, the means and the end, but they are his diverse fields of operation. And only the God is the common, all-pervasive, and unitary factor in them. So same God exists. It's one in many. Fire or the wind, though one, enters the world, assumes separate forms corresponding to the limitations, comes into contact, and assumes different forms according to the form of each being which it projects. He warms as Agni. He means the truth, the absolute truth. That's why Lord Krishna said in Bhagavad Gita, I am in Agni also, the warmth in that Agni. He is the sun. He is the bountiful rain. He is Indra. He is the wind. He is the earth, the matter, the celestials, beings and non-beings. He is immortal. The sad part is we look at only the forms and the names, and we forget the essence. So these Upanishads, these saints, they are bringing our attention to that oneness. This universal self should be recognized as one's own self. Again, all selves, even though they seem manifold, should be realized as one unitary. That's why, in a very simple way, in Bhagavad Gita, those two chapters, one in many, and then many in one. If you remember those two chapters, Vibhuti Yoga and Virat Rup Darshan Yoga. And this is exactly same thing this Rishi is telling us. All selves, manifold as they seem to be, should be realized as one unitary, universal self, eminent, and yet transcendent. The source of the entire world, of the human person, of the cosmic elements, of all forms of existence, of all activity of the organs of all beings, is the Supreme Self, who is the inner self of the person whom the wise Ajaat Shatru roused up from sleep, and all types of phenomena narrated by learned Brahman, Garge also. And to make it further clear, the mantra gives another analogy. Fire and the sparks. So first analogy was a spider and the webs. Now the fire and the sparks. Small sparks come forth by thousands from a blazing fire. Sometimes we don't see it these days in the modern kitchens, but in the old-time kitchens, or in the fireplace, or the bonfire when we make, we can see that in the blazing fire, thousands of sparks. They spread into every direction. The same way these sparks have spread into the entire creation. And what is this creation? The sense organs. He says all the worlds. We are familiar with only our little world. That also we just keep on making it narrower and narrower. But this Rishi is taking our mind towards all the worlds, all gods, devtas, all beings, He says they all come forth from this Supreme Self, and into it they merge again. All these move about in that vast creation like a spider in its own web. See, this is the essence, and the essence we forget. We just waste our life into me and mine, into the very tiny things, useless things, or I should say the petty things. After stating all about the individual self in relation to the cosmic self, this wise king Ajaat Shatru declared the secret name of this being, which he is discussing so far. He says it is the truth of truth. It is the self of the individual and of the world. So, in other words, the individual self is the same as the supreme self. And this unitary self, that means there's only one, unitary, is eminent in all things of this world. It is their pervasive reality. The multi-projection of the universe is not something which is different from him, but is his eminence. The individual self of a person, which projects forth itself through the venues of perception and moves around itself in its own creation, he says, as the spider projects its web and moves in it. He says it is in essence identical with the cosmic self. So the individual's consciousness, which appears to sleep in a person, because you remember he took Garge to that sleeping man, and he tried to wake up that sleeping man. So that's why, again, we got to remember that that individual consciousness, which appears to sleep in a person, again appears to wake up when he is aroused, has its source and substratum in the Supreme Self, who is eminent as well as transcendent. That's why it's called the causeless cause. That is the truth of this truth. Because this relative truth, which attribute is eminence, has its source in the Supreme Self. And this point will be further elaborated in future in the scripture. Right now, I want you to just understand it with the help of these analogies. At the same time, remember, no analogy can completely represent creation of this world phenomena by the Supreme Lord. We are only giving the pointers. Ultimately, it has to be experienced. So the analogy of the spider and its web, sure, it illustrates this material world which comes out of God, but it also tells us that world is non-different and identical with God. That's what we have to understand from that analogy. And the next analogy, which he used, fire and the sparks, it proves that the created world is fundamentally of the same nature as God. Because sparks, fire sparks, are nothing but fire. Because they both have essentially the same nature. So this is what these examples bring our attention to. That everything in creation is non-different in essence from the Supreme. So the empirical reality of this waking world and the illusory reality of the dream world have the absolute reality at their bottom, because they could not have existence without it. Modifications, they take place when the individual self appears to come out of the Supreme Self, or when the world phenomena is projected from the Absolute. You can understand it from this little story that a certain prince who was somehow lost in childhood was brought up by a hunter in the forest. He grew up into as a teenager, all the while thinking that he was a hunter and he was following the hunter's profession. After the lapse of a number of years, somehow who knew about the boy's royal birth accidentally met him and informed him that he was the prince of the country. The boy immediately left his false notion of being a hunter, assumed his original royalty, went to his palace, assumed the sovereignty of the land. Think about it. Did any change take place in the prince actually? While he was in the palace before he was lost, while he was in the forest leading the life of a hunter, and after he was crowned as a king subsequently? The prince was the prince all along. But the false notion that he was a hunter resulted in the temporary life of a forest hunter, and the right knowledge of his real birth restored to him the kingship. The same way, this individual self, or even this whole world, is really the absolute. Somehow, this knowledge appears to be lost in our own minds. And this has resulted in the suffering of this transmigratory existence. That means coming and going again and again into this sansar, because we have forgotten who we are. But when the right knowledge of the real nature of ourself and also this world is known from one's preceptor and the scriptures, the individual regains its lost sovereignty. The absolute existence. Just as the prince was a prince, even when in the forest, the individual and the world are really the absolute, even when they appear as such. Everything here is the absolute always. This is what King Ajaat Shatru is saying, that secret name is the truth of truth. This is their truth. So this ends this section. Next week, we will start this section 2, and the name of that section is Shishu Brahman. It's a very short section, only 4 verses. We will learn another meditation which is describing on prana through the analogy of a shishu. Shishu is a baby. So we will learn about that and we'll start next week from here, the new section. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaye Purnameva Viseshyate. Om Shanti 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 Om. Thank you very much for joining.